Who knew one day China will lose its monopoly over the offshored business? Back in the 1990s, Beijing established itself as the major hotspot for manufacturing capacity and cheap labor. That alone sent major companies into a frenzy. Everyone wanted a piece of China's supply chains and a workforce that doesn't ask for much. At the same time, the Chinese government also pushed for major reforms to boost its local businesses. And now, both Western and Chinese companies are leaving China, only to leave its workforce high, dry, and unemployed. The country is facing its homegrown problem of high unemployment rates, and matters are bound to get worse. So what's happening in China? The sharp decline in Made in China. Over the years, China has turned into a toxic partner that only cares about its needs and what it wants. Despite being a booming hub for emerging industries and technology, the country has done very little to foster its native companies back home. It's not surprising that more and more companies are distancing themselves from the Made in China label to look for more friendly options for moving manufacturing and production. Perhaps the most progressive example of this phenomenon is Shein, the famous clothing brand that was once the pinnacle of Chinese expansion. Shein expanded exponentially all over the world and set up its business in every nook and corner of the world. And while it was successful, the brand found itself in hot waters every other day. Sometimes it was getting dragged on social media for taking strategic advantage of China's exploitative labor laws. At times it was being scrutinized for being the clear-cut image of aggressive Chinese expansion that crushes all competition and violates any or all antitrust laws. Shein did its best to fight off the grave allegations, but then the CCP did not help its case either. Eventually, the company progressively moved its operations to Singapore after deregistering its original company from Nanjing. Now Shein is exclusively working with Washington lobbyists to galvanize its further expansion in the US. Its website doesn't refer to China anymore. And the clothing brand isn't the only Chinese entrepreneurial setup to close its shop back home. Big giants like ByteDance's TikTok, the shopping app Temu, and Alibaba are following suit. It's not surprising that these mega companies want to appease the United States. For instance, both ByteDance and Temu are setting up their major headquarters in the US to distance themselves from any influence of the CCP. And why shouldn't they? The Chinese government has been pretty candid about using its tech giants for surveillance tools in the name of national security. In recent legislation, the CCP holds its social media and tech companies liable to share their data with the country's intelligence forces to find an edge over its data warfare with Washington. After TikTok had a gruesome time in the US Congress, the CCP made sure to make a statement on ByteDance's nationalistic ties. That all looks wholesome and supportive until you see that the app was accused of just that, being a surveillance tool for the Chinese government. It's not surprising that the big tech giant's in the process of shifting its business to Singapore, just like Shein. And for the companies that do not optimize user data, the country has other ways of tarnishing their image. Beijing might have tried to push it under the rug, but its overwhelming support for Russian aggression in Ukraine didn't go unnoticed. Sure, Shein makes affordable fast fashion clothes that Gen Z loves, but no one really wants to buy from a brand that runs its shop in a warmongering country. It is both bizarre and shocking, but as it stands today, China is taking extreme steps to make sure that its local business doesn't stay afloat. While an entrepreneurial mindset is rampant in the country, the fleeing corporations are leaving behind a major problem for the economic hub. Loss in business is one thing, yet the most pressing concern is the rapidly increasing unemployment rate. Yep, in this age and time, no one is hiring in China. Major layoffs in China. From 1985 to 2015, the country's employable workforce increased by more than 70%. To cater to young graduates and skilled labor, China's government welcomed Western corporations with open arms. At the same time, the country also encouraged local enterprises to grow and foster at home to derive exponential job creation. And we can't say that the model wasn't successful. With a whopping population of more than 1.45 billion people, the CCP was bound to struggle with optimizing its workforce. What we didn't expect was the status quo. China's strategic geopolitical bullying and the overall hostility of the government have cost them substantial financial damage. And the most vulnerable group of people is the new workforce that has to hunt for jobs right after graduation. Not to mention, the country is also experiencing its very own living costs crisis. and the youth has a very limited economic reach in that economy. With rising inflation and the housing sector crisis, young people in China are still living through the major aftershocks of the pandemic. Western corporations, as well as the country's local industries, are wrapping up their businesses to look for more friendly offshoring options. And before they can finally move overseas, big giants are laying off major chunks of their employees, leaving them virtually unemployable in the long term. And nope, we aren't just operating on the business of speculation. It's also quite simple to configure. The young people in urban centers spend a considerable amount of resources to gain quality education, and once they graduate, they want to work in both Chinese or Western mega companies that offer higher paying jobs than most. This time around, China's cutthroat recruitment season is going to be pretty mellow because the big names aren't hiring anymore. In the short term, almost 17% of mainland companies have stopped hiring, while simultaneously making major layoffs. If numbers are anything to go by, we can see that the unemployment rate in China is devastating. In April 2023, the official CCP statistics recognized that more than 20.4% of employable youth are jobless, and their situation is not going to improve anytime soon. This particular faction of labor is aged between 16 to 24 and constitutes a major chunk of university graduates. Experts are also warning us to pay little attention to CCP statistics, as they are constantly being overestimated or underestimated, depending on the situation. In reality, China's youth unemployment rate is much higher than the whopping figure of 20.4%. And let's just say that it checks out. In 2023, China experienced an all-time high rate of university-educated graduates. This year only, almost 12 million students graduated from university, which is an increase of 820,000 compared to 2022. While these statistics would normally be a cause for celebration, China can't afford to pull out its party hats just yet. After a wave of major layoffs, many companies have also placed indefinite hiring freeze in almost all operational and manufacturing departments. And by all accounts, it is about to get worse. Global consulting firms are reporting that in the coming year, more than 43% of companies in China will either stop hiring or they will make major layoffs to fight off economic uncertainty or close their shops in the country. While these predictions were made for years 2023 and 2024, we're already seeing the turbulent impacts of alternative offshoring. At the start of 2022, internet technology companies like ByteDance, Tencent, JD.com, Station B, and Xiaomi fired a significant chunk of their workforce to cut costs or move overseas. And when it comes to the latter, Western companies are also following suit. Why US companies are leaving China? Time and time again, China has made its case about being an unreliable global supply chain center. If the war in Ukraine has taught MNCs anything, it is the fact that smooth geopolitical relations are hard to maintain. And if they go rogue, business suffers immensely. In particular, the US companies felt extremely vulnerable amid growing tensions between their parent country and China. During the process, the American government also nudged its corporations to friendshore their business rather than offshoring it. The classic difference here is that more and more US companies are moving their business to countries that don't exactly have a beef with their homeland. In 2022, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen laid out the friendshoring plan for its major corporations. In her own words, rather than being highly reliant on countries where we have geopolitical tensions and can't count on ongoing reliable supplies, we need to really diversify our group of suppliers. And while China has its own strategic advantages with robust technology and cheap labor, big companies are willing to make that trade-off if it means stabilizing their business in the longer run. Because as it stands today, Beijing isn't doing itself any favors by picking fights with major semiconductor producers like Taiwan and global business holder, the United States of America. In its maddening pursuits, China is making its own people jobless. And the game has just begun. Do you think China will recover from structural unemployment? Let us know in the comments below, and we shall see you soon.